Oh, well, thank you.
Okay, so I want to thank everybody for being here today to participate in this service dog handler chat. We host this week in partnership with Uber Paws of Love and Cindy Campbell Dog Training. And today we have a special guest. I just want to kind of go over some of our normal rules so that people can remember. Simple things like if you are not speaking, mute yourself, because that really helps to focus. It helps Zoom to focus on who is actually speaking so it doesn't flash all over the place. So please, when you're not talking, if you can just select mute, it save everything. If it gets to be too annoying, I can mute everybody, which I don't like to do, but I can. So if you do have a comment or question, raise your hand. If you don't know how to do that, you can simply just raise your hand on the screen. We'll see it. But Zoom has a feature down there in the reactions. So you can raise your hand there as well, and that'll pop you up to the top of our screen so that we know you want to say something. And that way we can work through first come, first serve a little bit easier and keep it so that we're not chatting over each other as much. So that's pretty much our really only standard rule. Our topic today is on scent. So if we're talking about one thing that has to do with scent and you want to suggest something else, type that in your chat screen, because then we can kind of put it down in our notes to get to without actually interrupting the conversation that's going on at the moment. So
Penny, you froze.
You frozen. Oh dear.
Uh-oh. She does that periodically due to bandwidth up there.
That's all right.
There you are.
There she is.
Yeah, thank you. I was just gonna say my phone is being weird, and so yes, internet is on my phone. If I lose connection, I'll disappear. Cindy can usually pick it up, and I will be back. It just takes me a minute to reset it sometimes.
Sorry.
It doesn't stop the Zoom, thankfully. So without further ado, I want to just introduce our guest today, who is here specifically to talk about scent. And so those of you that are regulars, you may recognize. Looks like I have one more thing here. Oh, there's a chat. Okay. So, so Jack, up in the top right corner of my screen, I'm not sure if that's the same for everyone else. There he is to give us a little bit of information on scent and his background in that. So Jack, I'm going to let you go ahead and take it over and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Brilliant. Well, first of all, I will say I am sweating horribly. So if at any point in time I pause to have a little drink, you'll have to forgive me because it is boiling. I think we were just saying beforehand, probably what I state as being boiling for you guys probably is nothing, a typical day. But for me, I'm sweating. So if I have to stop for a drink, I do apologize. So yeah, my background, I started working with, we call them assistance dogs over here, but service dogs. It's the first thing I ever did in the dog world when I was 18. And I've got to be honest, I wasn't really a dog person as a child, a teenager. I can't sit here and claim to any of you that I used to, you know, run through a field of wheat with a wonderful puppy and we used to kind of love our lives or anything like that. I was quite an insular child due to being autistic. And I fell into dog training and working with assistance dogs completely randomly. My mum was working as an admin assistant at a local assistance dog charity, and I went to do some admin, and one day I was bored. I went outside, one of the trainers said, "Hey, do you want to try training a dog?" I said, "Yeah, I'll do a little bit of basic obedience stuff." And from there it absolutely skyrocketed. So I spent a good 3-4 years working exclusively with assistance dogs, and I realized that actually I think that from my background, I was working mainly with the Labradors and the Golden Retrievers and the Spaniels, which are cracking dogs, but I was getting the same sorts of problems coming up over and over. And I realized that for me, what I really wanted to do was figure out, okay, well, how do I deal with something like a reactive dog? How do I deal with a dog with separation anxiety? How do I deal with a dog with resource guarding? And so I moved into pet dog training as well. And what I found was that I gravitated mainly towards nose work and scent. And again, that was kind of by almost pure accident. A friend of mine was going on a tracking instructor's course and said, "Hey, do you want to go with me?" And I said, "Yeah, go on then." And I had my little French bulldog. I still have my little French bulldog, Kevin, at the time. And we went, worked with a wonderful, wonderful company, and I taught him how to track. And then I was like, right, I've got the bug now. I want to do all types of nose work. And so what ended up happening is I began to diversify. I became a qualified scent work instructor, became a qualified man training instructor, did some search and rescue courses, and obviously tying it back into the assistance dog, service dog stuff, I then started working with a few people to teach their dogs, to alert them to various things going on. So that's kind of my background really in it. I've been very, very lucky to have such a diverse career so far. And I'm really excited to talk more about scent, because I think, as we'll discuss going forwards, I think scent is, even though it's being talked about far more than it was a couple of years ago, it still isn't being talked about enough, considering what it means to dogs, the impact it has on our dogs' behavior, and also, in my opinion, the success rate of specific service dogs, and the kind of how they're going to go ahead and go forward. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. Shall I just dive into the kind of next stage, or?
Yeah, because I know service dogs all have kind of a different opinion of, obviously, if somebody is doing a medical alert or something that's scent-based, might know a little bit about scent or work with scent a little bit, but a lot of service dog handlers don't really handle the whole idea of scent training or scent processing. So if you want to dive into that, go right ahead.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Well, I think the main thing that we need to really understand about dogs is that their sense of smell is how they process the world. It's the key reason that they are able to kind of process and think about the world around them. And we don't realize that, because our sense of smell in comparison is minute. It's terrible. So to put it into perspective, if we had the same power, I suppose, of sense of smell in our eyes. So if we could see as well as dogs could smell, we would be easily able to make out a stop sign on the moon. Dogs are capable of detecting a teaspoon of sugar in 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Why that was a specific study, I don't quite know. It's very niche, but the point remains that their sense of smell is sophisticated and strong. And this, I want to stress with you as well, is without training. So I'm not necessarily just talking about dogs who have gone through and done a bunch of scent work training. This is naturally, as dogs get older, as they develop, their sense of smell is that strong. So even if, as you were saying, Penny, even if your service dog doesn't do any scent related tasks or anything like that, they still have a really, really cracking nose. And it's really important to understand that for our dogs, they see the world through their smell, right? This isn't just a fad that they kind of go through and they've got this really cool skill. It's how they're processing the environment. So while we can sit here in our sense of smell, everyone's got different levels of sense of smells, but everything around you, if you looked around your room right now, everything in this room will have a specific scent associated with it. And then on top of that, there will be layers and layers of your scent, the scent of other people in your house, the scent of other dogs if you live in a multi-dog household. And what's really incredible about dogs is their ability to pinpoint the exact sense within that structure and within those spheres. So dogs are capable of, let's say, the way that I equate it to is, let's say you made a massive sandwich, like a huge, massive sandwich, and you stuffed it full of every single ingredient. Your dog is capable of picking out and figuring out exactly the right ingredients. So let's say you're teaching them to find tomato. They would be able to pinpoint exactly where the tomato is. They'd be able to pinpoint the intensity of the tomato, because different levels of scent, the amount of scent affects how it smells. And they would be able to sit here and say where it's located within that sandwich. So if you think about all of those different layers that we have going on around us of scent, because we're leaving scent everywhere all the time, the world is leaving scent, and dogs are capable of detecting scents that we don't even know exists when we think about the different chemicals in our body and things like that. So the way that they navigate the world alongside sight and hearing is through their nose. And it's important that we understand that, because by not utilizing scent, we fall into 2 very strong traps. We fall into the trap of not building our dog's confidence effectively, because the quickest way, in my opinion, to build a dog's confidence is to use their nose. And obviously service dogs can struggle sometimes with confidence as they're going through their public access. And also, we are missing a fantastic opportunity to use our dog's natural senses to make them happy. to make them more focused, to make them more confident, make them more energized. So a majority of the students that I work with, in fact, 95%, in whatever sphere, service dogs, pet dogs, dogs that just come to me for nose work, they come away from either the specific training, because I think I mentioned that I do specific nose work sports, but also just generally getting them to use their nose more. They come away more focused on their handlers. They come away more capable of learning and listening. There's been studies done that indicate that doing consistent nose work makes dogs more positive, and every dog is different. All right. And this is a key thing when you look at different activities, when you think about, you know, some dogs are older, some dogs are younger, some dogs have medical issues. I've yet to meet a dog that cannot do some form of nose work and some form of sniffing. So maybe you've got a retired service dog that needs something to do. Maybe you've just got a new service dog prospect. What matters is that I've yet to, in my career, be presented with a dog who I've sat there and gone, well, can't really use the nose. Obviously, you know, maybe there's something where a dog doesn't have a sense of smell, but 9 times out of 10, a dog can use their nose. And so I think it's really, really important that and why I'm so happy to be having this conversation, because I remember, Penny, we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago now, and we kind of were singing from the same hymn sheet, weren't we? Where we were like, actually, you know, the importance of a dog using their nose and how valuable it can be to both the service dog experience and just being a general dog is really, really valuable. So, yeah.
I know one of my like go-tos, I have a lot of clients to say, I don't think my dog's capable of learning this. So one of the very first things I teach their dog is scent related, and it's a silly parlor trick, really. But, you know, so if you place a treat in one hand, so you close both hands like this and put it up to the dog and ask them to pick which one, they're obviously going to touch the hand with the treat in it.
Yeah.
Once I can teach their kids how to do that with their own dogs, they're like, oh, I guess my dog can learn.
Yeah.
From there, it just opens all the other worlds. So you're right, scent work really does apply to every single dog. And every dog, even if they haven't developed it to the extent of some dogs, they are smelling things better than we could even imagine to be able to smell. So keeping that in mind, that whether we want them to smell or not, they're smelling.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not really when I talk about teaching dogs to use their nose, that I suppose that's perhaps an inaccurate way of putting it, because they know how to use their nose. What it is it's channeling it in a manner that they benefit from it a little bit more, and we benefit from it a little bit more, depending on what we're doing. So no, absolutely. And I think a really important point, talking about service dogs specifically, is environmental processing. Right. So what I mean by environmental processing is that, right, when you take your service dog out to do public access work, they will be encountering a whole host of different things in the environment. They'll be encountering people. They'll be encountering other dogs. They'll be encountering cars, bicycles. They'll be encountering different smells, food, you know, doors, windows, changes in sound sound differently inside and outside, smells smell differently inside and outside. And so what we have is we have a dog that, whether they're fully trained or not, is being bombarded constantly with stimulation over and over, just like we are. This is then compounded by their incredible sense of smell. So what ends up happening is we'll be going through a situation, and I've worked with tons of dogs who would do this, where we've been going through a situation and we might be, say, walking past a group of people, and we'll walk past one group of people and everything's fine. And we will then walk past another group of people, and the dog gets a little bit wary and a little bit unsure. And that group of people can be the same build, the same height, be wearing the exact same clothes, but there's something within that picture that's changed. And 9 times out of 10, I will kind of walk close enough and there'll be a certain smell that group of people will have. It's not necessarily a bad smell, but it's a certain type of smell that's just that little picture change. A common stressor that a lot of people don't realize is things like air fresheners and scented candles. So in a lot of my behavior work, one of the things that I ask is, do you have one of those air fresheners that puff kind of scent into the air, or do you use a lot of scented candles? And you would be surprised at how many dogs become really, really stressed by having that in the environment. And relating that back to service dog stuff, you know, one of the hardest places that I've ever found to get dogs used to is a candle shop. Really, really difficult. Or we have I don't know if you guys have it over in America. We have a place called Lush, which is basically like which is basic. I mean, we can smell it from about a kilometers away, so heaven knows what the dogs can do. But it's places like that that I find actually naturally stress dogs out, because if it's overwhelming for us from a scent point of view, it's going to be overwhelming for them. And a lot of the time, what we do with our service dogs is we will take them into a situation and we will allow them to process it in the way that we process things. So we will take them and we'll say, I don't know, let's say you're going to a fair or, maybe a shopping mall or something. We will go in and we'll go, right, okay, we'll stop. And we will think visually, okay, well, my dog has stopped and looked at that person there and the food court there and that shop there and these people coming out there and that trolley there, or whatever it might be. But actually what they're trying to do at that moment in time is sniff. They're trying to scent more. Their nose is on the ground and they're moving and they're kind of moving away from us and kind of checking stuff out. And what we do is we go, oh no, hang on. Sorry, no, pay attention to us. So what we're actually not doing is we're not allowing the dog the opportunity to process effectively, because what we're saying to them is you can process our way, but I'm not going to let you process your way. And to me, that is very much the equivalent. The way that I like to explain it to my students is, imagine that there was a series of rooms and I was going to ask you to walk into those rooms blindfolded. Now, a lot of people might go, and I might go, sometimes, to be honest, there might be something in there you might find a little bit frightening. Maybe you're a little bit unsure of men or, I don't know, clothes hangers or whatever it might be. And they go, oh, okay. And I go, you wouldn't actually like doing that, would you? Because the primary, I could sit here and say, well, you can listen and you can taste and you can smell, but you can't see. Automatically, that person's going to be a bit like, oh, I'm a little bit uncomfortable. I'm a little bit anxious. So I say, cool. So with our dogs, what we need to let them do is we let them air, scent, sniff, whatever it is, until they've smelled everything as much as they can and process that. So I equate it very much to like turning a light switch on in a room, right? They go through and in their mind, they're going, cool, okay, I'm going to scent here. And okay, I'm going to process that over there and that over there and that over there. And that doesn't look like, when we're processing something visually, I can sit here and I can look at you guys and I can look at this. And I can look at that and I'm processing it visually and it's a very obvious thing. But for our dogs, because their sense of smell is so sophisticated, they could be sniffing the grass nearby, but they're processing all the other people that are a good few feet away and they're processing all the dogs or all of the other smells. But we don't recognize that. And what we do is we see it as a lack of engagement or we see it as a training issue. When in actuality, what the dog's doing and is being really effective about is they are learning and processing that environment and they're going, okay, I can't cope right now. I need some more time to digest some information. I'm going to sit there and smell this grass for a bit, smell everything around. And then the amount of dogs who are then capable of going into these public access situations and smashing it absolutely skyrockets. So if there's one kind of key thing I want you guys to take away from this, it's that it is never a training issue if your dog stops to sniff to process something, because even if it takes a little while, what I also find is dogs eventually do it less, because once you let them process the environment, if you've never seen an elephant before as a child and you get taken to see an elephant, you might go, whoa, what the hell is that thing? And then you go, and the repeated viewings, you might go, oh, elephants are really cool, but there's not that initial visceral reaction. And that's the way that I find it with a lot of my assistance dog clients and students, where their dogs might need some time, for example, where they'll sniff kind of the ground and they'll sniff everything else. And then it will be a case of, okay, cool. Well, now I don't need to spend as much time sniffing the grass when we go to the shopping mall, or I don't need to spend as much time when we're at the fair or going to the local supermarket or whatever it might be. It gives them the opportunity to kind of process that. And it's important as well that we keep in mind that sniffing serves two functions. It serves the function of relieving stress. So there's kind of three things that dogs do in general. They sniff, they chew, and they lick. Those are the three things that dogs do to self-soothe, to calm down. The easiest one for them to do when they're doing public access work is sniff, because there's probably very few things that are around to lick, you'd hope, and there's even less things for them around to chew. So that gives them the opportunity to sniff. And studies have shown that sniffing lowers the heart rate in dogs as well. So it helps to teach them to be calm. And then obviously, when we're doing service dog work, we 9 times out of 10 want our dog to be calm and relaxed and chilled out. So one thing I would say as well is that some dogs do need to be taught to sniff, right? Like, even though it's a natural thing, we might have done a lot of training where we taught them actually you don't need to sniff in this context. Dogs need to learn to do this daily. I equate it to a bit like saying that you want to, let's say you want to go to, I don't know, the gym or something, right? Or you want to learn a new skill. You wouldn't sit there and go, right, I'm going to learn French. And you would do 1 day of French or an hour of French and then go, I've learned French, right? It's a consistent skill that for some dogs actually need to be taught and worked on. For all of the natural kind of talent that dogs have, they might sit there and not be able to cope in a certain environment. They might get in a public access situation and not know that they can sniff. And so some dogs, we need to accurately work and teach them how to do that behavior. So, and we can always talk about how we do that a little bit further along if anyone has any questions on that, because that's a very common thing that I do see come up is, well, okay, I understand the importance of sniffing now, but how do I actually teach my dogs to sniff in that context? How do I get them used to sniffing and processing?
There is a question in the comments, and so I'll just go ahead and read it. Says, we don't typically allow service dogs to process their environment the way they naturally would. How much does air sniffing or sniffing from afar while standing versus going up closer to sniff compare to their natural investigatory process?
That's a really, really good question. So in terms of how does it compare, I don't think it's never going to be as effective as going all the way in and getting their schnoz right in to sniff the thing, right? But sometimes that isn't actually what we want them to do anyway, even if it was possible. I don't particularly want my dog going and sniffing a random cyclist and getting all up in there. But what I have found is that, again, like a natural skill, the more they practice it, the better they get at doing it long distance and the better they get at doing it long range. Because what they learn as well, and we'll go into this, I'm sure, is that and I want to stress this is an anecdotal explanation. I'm not saying this is how it works in the dog's head, because I don't want anyone to go away and talk to a scientist and the scientist is like, what are you on about? But I view it very much like colors. So I tell my students that all the scents in the world have a color that your dog associates with them, okay? And obviously there's so many different tones and textures of colors. When I work with my reactive dog students, for example, I will say that maybe people, if they're scared of people have the color red, okay? And we'll say that blue is a positive color. What we want to do is at that moment, when that scent enters the dog's nose, they view that person and the smell of that person as red. It's bad. It's got a negative connotation. The things that they enjoy, probably their handler, food, whatever might be blue, but it's a different shade of blue depending on the thing. So what we want to do is we want to change that color from red to blue. And the more that dogs do things with their nose, the more that dogs process, the brighter those colors become, because obviously there's so many different colors in the environment. But when I teach man training, for example, what I want the scent of the person who's hiding to be the most present scent in the environment for that dog. I want that to be the thing that they focus on. So I equate that to kind of imagining a bunch of colors, and gradually the more training we do, the more associations, positive associations we build, the brighter that color becomes in the environment. So I hope that kind of makes sense. If I need to expand on that a little bit more, I'm more than happy to. But yeah, to kind of go back to your question, because I went on a little bit of a tangent there, I don't think it's ever going to be as effective, because obviously dogs like to get right up in there for a reason, don't they? They really enjoy getting in there, and I call it sniffing atoms, getting right into what they're smelling. But they can learn to do it as effectively. But also what you can do as well is you can figure out a distance that your dog is comfortable with. And I tend to find that when we do this type of work where we allow the dog to process using their nose, they actually gradually get closer. If it's safe, gradually get closer to the thing anyway. So they'll spend some time sniffing on one patch of grass. Let's say you're on a sidewalk, and let's say there's something off in the distance, and then they'll move to the next patch, and then the next patch, and the next patch. So gradually over time, they build in to actively doing that and kind of looking at it. So yeah, while it's probably not as effective as the kind of general dog goes up and sniffs another dog's bum, or dog gets right in there and sticks their nose, with enough practice and repetition, I believe it can, if not be as effective, still effective enough for what we're asking them to do and what our end goals are.
Yeah, I think that made a lot of sense, and I see that a lot with Azul. There is another question.
Oh.
It says, In my experience, I have to move my bifocal so I can see. In my experience, I have seen dogs be overly sniffy as a form of displacement. What do you think of this?
Absolutely. So another thing we need to consider when we think about dog sniffing is that some dogs do that as a stress reliever, right? So what we need to do is we need to weigh up at that moment in time, why is the dog sniffing? Is the dog sniffing to process, or is the dog sniffing to de-stress? And sometimes those two things are one and the same, right? But what we want to do is, my goal is, if I see a dog sniffing in an environment a lot, my brain then switches to, okay, they're uncomfortable in this environment. But how are they going to get better and more comfortable in this environment? Well, they're going to be sniffing. So if my dog is, let's say I'm halfway down a sidewalk, and at the end there is a person wearing a big overcoat, and my dog all of a sudden has just started sniffing rapidly, right? And that person in the overcoat is just stood at the end, minding their own business, doing whatever, they're not moving. My dog's sniffing rapidly. And I can look at that and I can go, okay, it probably doesn't make sense to move closer now. Instead, what I should do is I should move back. So I'll take that dog back maybe a quarter of the way along the sidewalk, and we'll stop, and the dog will sniff, 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 sniff. And then what I tend to find is when a dog has finished processing, as I was just saying earlier, they will then move forward themselves. So what I'm always looking for with a dog who's processing is, are you confident enough to move a bit further forward? And most of the time the dog says yes. And in my line of work, because I work with a lot of reactor dogs, I have to be like, not now, we're not actually going to do that. I appreciate that you're ready, but actually you might get too close, right? Some dogs, they get that kind of air of confidence and processing, and they'll go forwards because that thing that they're processing is static. It hasn't changed. So maybe it's a dog that's sniffing the floor themselves, and they go, I'm actually confident with that. They'll move a bit closer. The dog will go, oh, there's a dog. They'll look up, and then they're too close and they're over that threshold. But actually, I tend to find that dogs are very, very good at letting us know when they're ready to proceed. You just have to look at them, and obviously you will know your dog, and look at that environment and go, is it safe for us to do that? And if it isn't safe, why isn't it? So is it fair if my dog sits there and goes, man, you know what? I've really, really processed that massive dog over there. I'm ready to go and say hello now. I might look at my dog and I might go, you don't actually have the social skills yet to really go and have a good interaction. So you might feel confident enough, you might have processed that dog and we might have been good, but I know your history enough now that I can sit there and go, actually, we're going to hold off. We're just going to stay where we are. So as with anything dog related, it is very specific. But yes, dogs do sniff as a displacement behavior. If you see a lot of sniffing, you do need to take a couple of steps back in their training and kind of try and figure out why. But I would never sit here and necessarily say that if they're sniffing a lot, you should completely leave that area. What you should do is move further back and see if it changes, because sometimes it is just a, whoa, we're way too close. And then we head a bit further back, the dog sniffs and then goes, actually, I'm going to move a little bit closer now. And it's that kind of less rapid, less frantic, more just kind of ambling, chilling, having a little sniff. And that's kind of the processing that we want, cool as a cucumber.
I think it's also important to note that it can be the opposite side of the spectrum as well, not just a dog that's fearful or reactive. And Azul's a great example of that. He tends to get overly excited in some environments, especially outdoor environments. For instance, we were on a walk just the other day and a new trail we hadn't walked, and there were deer in the woods everywhere. So it was right on that level of close to threshold for a good portion of the thing. And while it was safe and I knew we could move forward, it's trying to keep him from sliding over. And so being able to, know your dog well enough to see where those lines are, and knowing when it's time to like, nope, this is it, we're not pushing it anymore, or getting, backing up, adding that distance, whatever you need. But it's the same thing whether they're reactive or overly excitable in situations, because they're still processing the environment. They're still trying to take in. And so in Azul's case, it's like, let me go forward, forward, forward. I can't get forward fast enough. So it's a little bit different, but there you still have to keep that in mind that, well, they need time to process that. And sometimes if you can just stop and let them process, then they can move forward without totally going over a threshold. Whereas if you just follow them and match their speed to let them keep going forward, you can then easily send them over threshold without realizing it. So it's a really fine line.
Yeah.
And dog's a little bit different there, but I can watch his sniffing based on, say, the rate of sniffing. So if he's just sniffing, you know, like the female kind of thing, casually sniffing, then I know he's relaxed and enjoying the environment. But then if he's all of a sudden sniffing faster and darting more like left and right, then I know he's onto something that's potentially going to lead to overexcitement. So I can use just that little subtle sign as my indicator of, is it time to stop for a break? Do we need to pull off? What do we need to do here? So, and every dog has those little tells if you can watch for it. But so many people get stuck on the reactive, which I get. I've worked with a lot of reactive dogs.
Absolutely. And that's one of the
both ways.
Yeah, no, and that was going to be my next point as well, is that a lot of the time we can focus from an anxiety point of view. But as you say, I work with so many adolescent dogs, right, who stop sniffing. They actually get to the stage where they're so wound up by the environment, they stop using their nose. And so we have kind of the opposite problem, where we have a dog who might be in an anxious point of view using their nose too much and getting too frantic, or aroused as well, as you were saying. But actually we have dogs that don't. So it is that really fine line and that fine balance of knowing your dog's behavior. And even if your dog isn't anxious or reactive, but actually is a dog who does get excited, as you say, walking and looking for deer, or just gets excited at the prospect of seeing people and dogs and things, seeing how frantic their sniffing is and how they're moving, and that forward drive to go, go, go is so, so important. So yeah, I mean, we've spoken a lot about kind of the theory and kind of why nose work is important. And I think it's probably time that we give you guys some things that you can do with your dogs. So
sorry, can I ask something on that?
Yeah, of course.
So as Penny knows, I've had a couple of dogs that are kind of fearful. And my one, as you were just talking about, wasn't real good about sniffing when she was stressed. So what I learned with her was to sit below threshold with her and watch what she was afraid of from a distance. And then she knew her stress level better than I did, but I would watch her body language. And when she felt comfortable, she would reach back and get a treat from me, which is kind of a weird way of doing it, but she was a weird dog.
That's
but how many people do you find that don't learn their dog's body language? Because you can't always go by their sniffing. Sometimes you have to learn your dog, you know. How do you go about teaching people? Because every dog is different too on their, even though there's general body language guidelines, some dogs go from 0 to 60 in nothing flat as far as their threshold goes. And then some build up to it slowly. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, excellent question. So my big thing is that I tend to approach, funnily enough, for all the big deal that I've just made about scent work, I tend to approach, when I think about it from a body language point of view, as a part of the picture, not the full picture. Because just like you, if I turned around and I tell my students focus on their sniffing only, that's the only thing that people focus on, and they don't see the nuances of their body language. So what I always make a point is say that while scent is important, our dogs have all of these other different things that they do to let us know they're aroused or frustrated or excited or anxious or reactive or whatever it is. And that realistically, and they are all individual. So every dog that I've ever worked with has an individual tell, an individual sign that indicates to them that they're stressed or anxious. One dog that I work with lets us know he's anxious because his right ear always goes back. Just his right ear always goes back. And that's a really specific thing that I found to him, right? Like obviously some dogs might do that, but it's a really specific way. I can't really explain it without showing you, but it kind of curves up and then back. It's really odd. But that's his way. So what I always tell people is, yeah, you're right. Like some people do get caught up in just focusing on one aspect of body language. I always tell people what I want you to do is maybe we'll be out and we'll be doing, say, a first consultation. And I said, okay, what I want you to do just now is I just want you to focus on your dog's tail and just tell me what you see. And they'll say, blah, blah. I'll go, cool. Then I want you to focus on their back or their ears or their mouth. And then, because I also find that my students, if I tell them, look at the whole body, what they will do is they will look at one part of the body exclusively. And I go, no, we need to look at everything, because dogs actually give us lots of information. We just need to be quick at learning to read it. And over time, we just keep checking back in, because I think as well, don't want to take it off on too much of a tangent, but when we tell people to watch body language, what we tend to do is teach them to watch body language in situations where the dog is uncomfortable. And I think that's where we kind of get it wrong, because a lot of the time people will look at their dogs and they will go, my dog is uncomfortable, really stressed, but then they actually don't notice the signs leading up to that stress, or they don't notice that their dog is sometimes happy or sometimes excited, and those different variables. So yeah, absolutely. It's a really important thing that we teach dogs to, or we teach people, excuse me, to look at everything going on with their dog's body language. And that's what I encourage all of you to do, and everyone else that you speak to do as well, because sniffing is a part of the puzzle, but it isn't a complete puzzle. It's just a part of the puzzle that I feel we miss a lot of the time. So yeah.
Cindy, I believe, had a question, and I think she unmuted herself. So
Mine's kind of on a tangent. And so I live, I live in an area where we have mountain lions and rattlesnakes, and they do come into town. Have you ever done any avoidance training with scent?
I have done so. We don't have mountain lions down here, so we don't have very many animals that dogs should be afraid of. So I've not done it specifically with that. One of the things that I have played around with casually with some dogs that I've worked with is we've taught the dogs that in the event that they smell a specific thing, they come back to their handler and they do an alert, right? And I've always been curious. One of the things I would love to explore in the future is how effective would that be if, for example, it would be a, I don't know, again, it's difficult to kind of say because we don't have very many things down here, but we have like adders, for example, so different types of snakes, maybe the scent of a snake or something. How could we train that where the dog sniffs that and the default behavior is actually a recall cue back to the handler and an alert to go, I've just found this thing. That's a difficult one in some aspects. Because I think that doing it that way, you run the risk of creating a really strong association with the scent, wherein the dog goes, I found my scent, and then wants to stay there, which we kind of not really for what you're looking for. I don't think that'd be good. So I can't sit here and say that I have done something specifically like that, but I've played around with a concept that, while I can't sit here and say for sure would work with that, I have a pretty good feeling about the kind of bare bones of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm thinking of just putting that on as an extra cue, just because we're out and that I kayak where there's snakes, and I really.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting thought process. And I think that's one of the really cool things about scent, isn't it? Is how we can encounter a lot of problems, whether that be, you know, with wildlife or whether it be with avoiding certain situations. And, you know, obviously I don't need to really talk about different tasks that dogs can do alerting to the different things that we struggle with. That makes it so varied and so diverse. So no, that's a really cool question. Thank you. Cool.
I have a question, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
I know an answer to it too, but here's what yours is. So if you're not using a dog for scent training for medical alert or something specific like that, so just say the regular family pet kind of thing, playing around the house, what is your go-to game that involves scent?
Oh, that's a good one. It depends. So it depends on the breed. If I'm working with a gun dog, it's really simple. We have socks or gloves. We hide gloves. You find gloves. We all go ballistic. Dog runs around, has a nice parade. Reason I like that purely is for guarding purposes. One of the ways that I deal with resource guarding with objects, with gun dogs specifically, is to teach them to retrieve the objects and bring them back. So that's the thing I do for gun dogs. For other dogs, it's specific to kind of what the handler wants. So if I'm working with a handler who says my dog is a little bit kind of disconnected outside, I will do hiding for people, right? So I work with a lot of families with young children. I'll say, cool, young child has some food, runs off and hides in the bushes. You send the dog out, the dog finds the young child, eats the food, comes back to the parent, says, hello, parent, I found the child. They run back and they will a big party. If it's a dog that needs calming down, I'll do some really light tracking. So it might be the case of, I will have, if they've got a big garden, I'll have them walk in a straight line, put like a glove or something down with a bit of food. The dog comes out, sniffs around, and eventually they learn to just follow that specific pathway. And, you can take that out and about. My go-to, it doesn't tend to be enrichment toys. And it doesn't tend to be, I love free work as well, actually, which I'll talk about in a minute, but it doesn't tend to be specific enrichment toys. And the only reason is I'm not saying I dislike enrichment toys, but for teaching nose work, a lot of the time, an enrichment toy, the challenge isn't sniffing, it's accessing the food, which is not the same thing in my mind. So if I've asked a dog to find a glove, the objective is to find the glove. If I have something like a snuffle mat, while they will be sniffing, the objective isn't sniff to find the food, it's to get the food out of the snuffle mat, even if they have to use their nose. Does that distinction make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's kind of, those are the three things that I tend to do the most. Free work as well. So for those of you that don't know what free work is where you set up a whole assortment of different objects. So this is enrichment toys included in this, but it's different surfaces, boxes, things at different heights, and you lace it with all different types of food. So I get like really crunchy food and soft food to lick. And you just let your dog go and explore that. They don't wear any equipment and they just go out and they explore. And the really cool thing about that is that it is a completely disconnected, isn't there, but it's completely dog-led. And you can just sit and watch how your dog moves and interacts. And you learn so much, but it's a really calming process that takes time. So I'm a big fan. If I'm working with dogs who are either anxious or really excited, I like long activities for them to do. So I will sit there and I will go, what can we make this dog do for 20 minutes? Where this dog is out there working and sniffing and engaging and exploring and building their confidence. Well, that's going to be something like free work because it takes time to investigate and navigate those things. Another thing that is always so important that people don't tend to think about is that every time that you do something with your dog that involves you putting something out for them, that involves you putting food somewhere, that involves you doing any form of nose work, the scent that they will build the biggest positive association with, even if you are teaching them to find a specific scent, right? So lots of people use like cloves or truffle oil or gun oil or something for the more sports-based things, is you. So what I love to do is when someone might say get a rescue dog or they've got a new puppy and they've got a house full of people, I will always say, cool. So what I want you to do is every day you're going to do free work, but each day a new member of the household is going to set that environment up because that person's scent is going to be all over that space. The dog will go in and they'll sniff and they'll eat it. And they will go and, be eating all the food. And I've worked with dogs who I've done this with who hate people, who hate people. And after a few sessions where they've not even interacted with me, they'll greet me tail wagging, they'll be quite happy. On the other hand, I will have dogs who are really wound up and really excited, but my scent now has the association with calm because we've just done the free work and the tracking and the kind of calming activities, and they'll come up and they'll greet me far calmer than anyone else. So using stuff like free work and using your dog's nose to build an association with human scent, whether that's your scent, whether that's the scent of other people in your house, whether that's the scent of people coming over, is really, really valuable. So out of the four things that I would recommend, if you've got a gun dog, hide something in the house that they can grab and pick up, gloves, socks, whatever it is, tea towel, doesn't matter. If you've got a dog that can be a bit disconnected outside, hide with people, go find people, big party. If you have a dog that's really excited and really kind of over aroused and gets really aroused, a little bit of light tracking. And to be honest, free work I'd recommend for any dog, to be fair. But if you have a dog who perhaps has come into I use free work probably for dogs who are in new situations. So if you've got a new puppy, you've got a new rescue dog, you've got people coming over that your dog's never met, and maybe they're a bit nervy or a little bit bouncy and excitable too. Yeah, like it's two sides of the same coin. Free work is the way to go. So those are, I know you asked for one and I gave you four, but those are kind of the four default things that I tend to do with pet dogs.
You touched on mine too, so I won't go into big detail. My number one is the find it. And the reason I like that as opposed to the enrichment toys, which are fine if you want to, if the goal is to get that dog comfortable being alone, enrichment toys are awesome because they're alone with the enrichment toy quite generally. You give it to them and walk away. But when I'm working with scent work, I want my dog to engage with me more in it. So the free work is great too, because dogs do need that. And I do a lot of sniff about time. But so the find it games are the, you're going to stay here, I'll go hide it, or hide a person, because we do it with people and play hide and go seek too. But then the dog has to go find that object and bring it back to me, or stand and, whatever their alert is to say, hey, I found it.
Yeah. And
so it's an interactive, we're doing it together, not solo. So those are my kind of go-tos because of that. And I can use find it to teach so many different things. And I see that with basically the young puppy of teaching them the lesson that good food comes from my hands. Find my hand. If you can find the food in my hand and practice that, and slowly, all right, now can you find the food if I drop it on the floor in between my feet? Can you find it if I put it here? And kind of just expand from that way up to where I can hide anything I want, like my water bottle or my keys or anything, and have my dog find it. We do have another question that I want to read real quickly, and it's kind of a long one. So I'm going to kind of paraphrase a little bit.
Sure.
So this person is expecting a new puppy that will be a service dog prospect.
Excellent.
And so the breeder does early neurological stimulation and scent introduction using puppy culture. And so she's looking for, the way to continue that process for the puppy once it comes home, because she'll be using it for a medical alert dog.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to give two answers to this. I'm going to give an answer that is, because I don't know what the scent is, so I'm not sure whether we're discussing as in just a novel scent like the scent of lavender, or we're discussing as in it is a scent associated with medical alert. So I'm going to give you, feel free to, I think it was Sarah.
I was just going to say it's a little bit of both, because she's starting out with just scents in general with the puppy stage, but then slowly merging into.
Sure, absolutely. So I would be that. Okay, so I'll give two answers then. The first answer will be working on the idea that you're just getting a novel scent and building it up. The thing that I always think about is what is the end goal with your dog. So if you want your dog to do medical alert, what are we looking for in that end indication? What are we looking for the consistency? What situations are you going to be in where that matters? So for example, I tend to teach dogs, I have kind of three rules with scent in general. You've got indication, you've got searching, and you have scent ID. So I will do exercises with a puppy where I'll go, okay, what are you most likely going to be searching? Right. And how is that going to work? So, for example, with some puppies, if I'm working with a student who maybe is doing medical alert and they're going to be in a wheelchair, and the student says to me, I want the alert, they've maybe got a smaller dog, I want the alert to the dog to jump on my lap and it target my heart or my neck or whatever, or maybe it's a bigger dog and they put the paws up. My first thing is, okay, where am I going to teach the dog to find things first? It's going to be a little bit elevated. Or it's going to be a case of if it's a dog that, I'm working on a novel scent and maybe the student is going to be wearing lots of clothing, I will teach dogs to search, lots of clothing and things like that. So that's kind of always the thing that I think in terms of how to continue it on. I like making a really strong association with a scent first, before even thinking about searching. So my key rule is I expose the dog to the scent for the first few weeks that they're home at puppyhood. I will expose them to that scent. So I'll use lavender as an example. I might have a Kilner jar and have a little bit of lavender, and all of their meals, I will open that Kilner jar, let the scent of lavender in the room and feed them. And I continue that for weeks. And that's all I do while I build the relationship with the dog, while I look at what all the other things the dog is doing. I don't do anything search related. Then I will sit there and I'll go, okay, what's my end goal with this dog? What am I looking for? And I'll just put little situations where I might sit there and go, okay, cool. All I'm going to have is I'm going to have a little bit of sponge. I'm going to put it in a little container. I'm going to pop that out. Puppy's going to wander in, sniff that container, woo, big party, and I'll reward them. And I just build it up like that. So I just start teaching the dog, kind of back chain it, find this, sniff it, reward, find this, sniff it, reward, even if it's just moving it around. And then I build it up to it being hidden around the room and then hidden a little bit more. And I build a proper search for it. For medical alert dogs, 9 times out of 10, there isn't actually a search element. There's just a realization that there is a scent and an indication. So it's a bit of a tangent that I'm not necessarily going to go into. I always teach any indication behavior for any dog separately from the scent that they're doing it on, which we can always talk about that if someone has a question on that, but I always teach it separately. So while I'm getting the puppy used to that, I call it the coin game. I do it with coins because that's what I use for tracking and things as well. I will teach the puppy to indicate on a coin. It might be a down, it might be a freeze. And the puppy does that alongside building the scent. And then once I know what I want that puppy to do and what I'm going to build that puppy to, I will teach the puppy, hey, we can search for this thing. And then very quickly on, I will combine the indication training that we've done that's really solid and really kind of sharp with that scent, so that my puppy can come away after a few months being able to indicate on that scent in the way that they're happy with, provided that I'm at the stage where I feel the puppy's trait, if it's going to be a medical alert dog, where I'm confident that the puppy is capable of handling what that means. Because we have to keep in mind that when we train a scent and an indication to the scent, we can't, if it's a medical alert, we can't switch that off. So I need to know in my head, is my puppy mentally sound, physically sound? Are they capable of the responsibility of handling that? Because if they're not, I will spend all my time teaching to find a really novel scent over and over and over again and just making that such a strong association. Because one of the things that I don't think people realize is there's this big thing, there was at the time when I was learning, there was this big thing that it's really difficult to transfer a dog's indication and stuff to another scent, and it's really difficult to transfer that association. It isn't. I'm a different example, but I trained my dog Kevin on gun oil to start with, and I was like, I want to use cloves because that's what they use in competitions over here. I did it in a day. So you're not going to sit here, and if you just spend a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years teaching your dog to find the scent of cloves or gun oil and really building up that association, you aren't going to be at a disadvantage necessarily, in my opinion anyway, from when you then start teaching them to do the medical alert tasks, because your dog will already have such a strong, capable nose, you'll be able to move them on quickly. And it will take time to build that strong association, but it's like a muscle in the gym, right? Like if you do bicep curls all the time, when you then start doing other arm movements, it might not be as easy because you've been working a specific muscle, but you've still been working out your arms. So you're still going to be able to do that behavior easier than you would. So that was a really long roundabout way of answering that question. But yeah.
She did add in some information.
Oh, sorry, I missed that.
It's now like rabbit and chamomile and things like that. But in the end, it's going to be heart rate alert and gluten detection will be her go-tos. But no, I totally agree with what you were saying. And you're familiar with search and rescue a little bit, so you're probably familiar with the science part of short-term memory, long-term memory. And so our dogs are very capable of learning that, you know, this particular scent that I'm smelling right now is this is what I'm looking for today, kind of short-term memory process, such as if you were getting a scent article for a lost child in the woods or whatever, that would be a short-term memory. They're smelling it now, that's their job for the day, versus something like the gluten detection is a long-term memory smell. You want it to be so ingrained in them that they know that smell, and you don't have to present it to them before you send them out to hunt.
Yeah.
And so I do a little bit of both with my dog being trained for the migraine alerts, is that the migraine alert is the short term, but we play, or with the long term, said it backwards, but we play in the short term almost every day because that's good for his nose and just keeps his brain going. It doesn't make him forget the long term. And I can add in a new long term if I want to, just by using it regularly. So dogs can really learn that difference between the distinguish.
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing about the science of a dog's nose, and this is another thing to really consider, okay, is that dogs around every month, they actually regenerate the cells in their nose. And what they do is that, and this is an automatic process, is the nose replicates the scents that have the most meaning to the dog. So dogs naturally get better at doing nose work, provided you expose them to that scent over and over. And then their nose goes, oh, that's really important to us in our job. So we will just naturally create more scent receptors that make that easier to pick up. So my big rule with nose work is I always tell my students when I do classes in monthly blocks, and I always say to them, give it a month. And on the 5th week, your dog will be so much better at this than you remember them being. And they go, what do you mean? I was like, just give it like a month. And I promise you, your dog will come in and be miles better. And they go, okay. And they come back and maybe I'm doing man trailing or tracking. And their dog does it so much better. And they go, oh my God, what happened? I've not done anything with them this week. And I'll go, or I've done not as much. And I'll go, because their nose is regenerating. So what you were saying, Sarah, like absolutely, it kind of, and what you were saying, Penny, as well, that long-term memory is also stored in the nose. Yes, the more that you do, the more that you practice with different scents. And our dogs' noses are so sophisticated that you could teach a dog, I don't know how many scents someone has actually taught a dog to find. You could theoretically teach a dog to find hundreds of scents, I imagine, if you wanted to. The reason that people don't teach dogs to find tons and tons of scents is purely because what happens if a dog is exposed to multiple of those scents in the environment? They're just going to target the one that has the most value. But theoretically, you could absolutely, my dog, Kevin, he can find, technically now, God, he can find human scents, so he does tracking. Tends to be for my scent, but other people's as well. He can find gun oil and he can find cloves, you know, and those are 3 scents that are, from a chemical point of view, are probably very different, but he can locate those easily enough. So yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. That was really, really informative. And the person with that comment also said thank you. It was really
No worries, Sarah.
her plan. So, all right. I didn't know if you were watching chats or not. So, and I didn't know the part about regenerating. I just knew it makes sense because I knew that if you, for a medical alert, if you don't have the episode frequently enough, so there's a long gap, you have to retrain it after about 4 months. So say if it's a seizure alert and you've gone 6 months without a seizure and never had anything, you often have to retrain that alert. So that it makes sense that the regeneration is what causes that. So I think Cindy had a question or a comment.
Cool.
What are your thoughts on training more than one scent at a time, such as if you're training a blood sugar alert and you're training to find somebody?
So I definitely think you can. My thing with it, though, is to avoid confusion. The situation, the circumstance, and the cues have to be very different. So not related necessarily to service dogs, but I teach tracking and man trailing. So by tracking, just in case I haven't made that clear, that's when the dog will follow human scent to find an end article, so a glove, a sock, a coin, something that smells like the track layer. Man trailing will be the trail layer, the missing person, as we call them, will drop an item that smells like them. They will go and hide. And then based off the scent of them on that article, the dog will go and find that person. Okay, so it's all human scent, all right? But the context and how that occurs is very different. So for example, for tracking, we will get the dogs to be shown the object they're going to go and find. For man trailing, they kind of just find it on the ground. It's just there and they go and do that. Man trailing is more air scenting, tracking is more ground scenting. There's a whole host of different variables with it. So theoretically, you can teach dogs to do multiple scents at a time. It's just about weighing up what does that look like and how are they different from each other? Because if you are sat there and you're doing, if you're doing a, what were the two things that you said? Sorry. So it was
finding a person and blood sugar, low blood sugar, blood sugar alerts.
Sure. So those to me are two very different things. Yeah, because theoretically, if you're getting them to find a person, there'll be a bit of a preamble. To start with anyway, the person is probably going to run off and hide. They're going to do this thing. You're going to give that cue. It's going to be a very different reward structure. Whereas if we're looking at blood sugar alerts, I'm imagining you're talking about yourself. The indication you're going to want is going to be very different. It's going to be very different, probably a bit calmer. The context looks so different, right? And it's kind of like, I suppose the way that I would kind of equate it is that walking and running are both movement, but they're different. Or, for example, running cross country is very different than a 100-meter dash. But they're still running, but it's a different skill set. There's different context cues. And that's the same, I think, for dogs. So I think that there shouldn't really be an issue. Some dogs can get a little bit confused, but again, they're so sophisticated that provided you isolate and say blood sugar alerts, I imagine it's highly unlikely that your dog will be finding a person who's hiding and then go, oh, that person is also having a blood sugar alert. I'm a little bit confused. It's more than likely that they'll be able to make that distinction, that they're really, really good at it. It's not something I've ever come across. So yeah.
We're
Okay,
working.
Question. Oh, Cindy, are you done?
I was just going to say, we're working on Nick finding my dog Nick finding my boyfriend in the store when we're out, and then also blood sugars.
Sure.
Kenny has that task installed in Azul, so he goes and finds her husband. It's actually a very useful task when you have low energy.
You can find just about any family member and any friend we spend a lot of time with. We put them on name too, especially our friends with other dogs, because then it's easy for them to go find the other dog if they're in the store. And friend Jen here also has a comment.
So a little bit on what you were talking about earlier with the really, really smelly stores, like the candle stores or the makeup stores that have perfume being sprayed all over the place and everything. My dog does seizure alerts for me, among other things. And my dog goes into a makeup store. I made the mistake once, I won't make it again. But, you know, not only is it sense galore, it is also loud music, and it's big sensory overload. And if your dog is trained to work for you and to pick up on one of your scents, all of that scent stimulation could become very confusing for your dog and also stress them out because they feel like they can't do their job for you. So something else to think about if you have a dog that's doing medical alert based on scent.
Yeah, 1000%. Cool.
I think we touched on everything we had wanted to. I'm curious, does anybody else have any questions? We're just slightly over time, but I don't want to leave a question unanswered if somebody else has one.
Yeah, no, happy to talk for longer if anyone else has any questions. But if not, that's fine too.
You know me, I could talk all day long.
Yeah, no, I'm the same. Quite
And
happy.
we never talk.
Cindy's the same as well.
Especially if it involves our dogs.
Of course, of course.
I'm not seeing any other questions. It looked like Sarah went out and is coming back in. She might have one.
That's all right.
I know that mine just dropped and came back in as well. So we'll wait just a minute for her.
I found it really fascinating. I wish I'd known more about this. My original trainer didn't get as much into the scent thing as Penny does, and you've gone into it even further. And we're working with two separate fearful dogs, because I didn't realize at first that Guinness was. I think I could have done a lot more for my dogs had I known this previously. And now I'm getting ready to bring in a new dog. And I think this will help me a lot with the newer dog to get past some hurdles, because I'll know more, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Totally
absolutely.
get that. We all need that in the service dog world, or, we don't know what we don't know. Even in the dog training world, forgetting service dogs, we don't know what we don't know. So the more we learn, I'm a much better dog owner now that I know, I've taken my behavior classes and things. Now that I've done that and expanded my brain, it really affects my own personal dogs a lot more as well.
And you did the best you could for the dogs you had at the time.
Yeah.
Now you know more, and it doesn't matter how much you know when you get the puppy. There's always going to be, oh, I wish I had done that with the puppy instead.
Yeah.
It just,
And
Still get that guilt thing going though. It's scary.
One thing I will say as well for everyone is I'm a big believer that there's genuinely only one thing I'm confident at when it comes to dog training, genuinely, and it's that I'm confident and I believe in my ability to get better, and that's it. That's all I need. Because, like, for example, obviously, Cindy, we were talking about teaching a dog to avoidance, and I was kind of like, I mean, I've got an idea, but I don't know completely if it worked. And that's the cool thing about it, right? And that's the thing that we're going to discover, because 10 years ago, the science around scent, it was nothing. No one was talking about it. Pet dog people weren't talking about it. It's only really, for at least over here in the United Kingdom, it's only been the past 3 years that it's really taken off and is becoming a force and a thing that people are consistently discussing. And I don't know what it's like over in America. Maybe it's different, but as you guys said, you don't know what you don't know. And the thing is, you know it now, and we can tell more people, and eventually this scent thing will spread all over the world, and there'll be all these dogs doing their sniffing, and whether it's sniffing for fun or sniffing for blood sugar alert or migraine alert, or Cindy will have an army of dogs avoiding rattlesnakes and mountain lions and things. It's all going to be sorted. That's the really cool thing about it.